Sometimes you see a game and you know that you're gonna drive yourself crazy getting the achievements. Dyson Sphere Program is one such game. It's a factory sim game, adding its own special space themed twist on the genre by giving you a whole galaxy to play with. While the game's normal goal is to feed a computer 4,000 sugar cubes, I have a different goal today. Hi, I'm Graham. Normally I play old school RuneScape here on YouTube, but today I'll be doing something completely different. Dyson Sphere Program has many strange achievements, and I'm aiming for one that I consider the strangest, before our time. You get this achievement by touching down on a planet in another system before you get the ability to warp. Traveling to other planets is par for the course in this game, but without warp, it can take over an hour or more to get there. With that in mind, come along as we throw ourselves into the void of space, chasing fake gaming points. Our journey begins with a pleasant flyby of the planet where we're going to be spending the next several hours. Every run of Dyson Sphere Program always begins on the same type of planet, a grassy planet with lots of basic resources so that it isn't too hard to get off the ground. After a gentle landing, we get to work. The game gives us a handful of resources to get us started, but we'll need to get more if we're ever going to get to space. To that end, we slap a miner down on the nearby iron vein, and a couple minutes later we get one set up on the nearby copper. We'll need to progress down the tech tree to get the stuff that we need to really get started, and most of the early research requires actual items rather than the colored squares we'll need later. So at the start there's a lot of waiting around while we craft the basics. After spending a few minutes standing around, we unlock smelters and conveyors, which means our factory fun can really begin. Iron ore gets smelted into two different products that we need, so we set up two smelters, one for ingots and one for rings. Once we have those, we get our copper online, so we can start making everything we need for our first big milestone on the way to the achievement. With a bit of extra time to kill, we research the first core upgrade for our character. Think of it like adding on an extra battery pack, before we move on to unlocking assemblers. Assemblers are the bread and butter of any factory sim, and they'll be doing the majority of the heavy lifting for us. We get a couple set up so we can start making circuit boards and magnetic coils. These two get used for so much through the early parts of the game, but the most important thing for us is that they enable us to reach the first big step towards our goal: electromagnetic matrices. These little blue cubes enable us to start researching tech beyond the bare bones basics that we have, and we're going to need a lot of them, so it's time to start setting up a lab. Our basic setup has the assemblers feeding into a stack of labs to produce the matrices, before feeding those into another stack of labs that actually does the thinking. The more labs you have in a stack, the faster you research things, which could be very handy later in the game when the tech is more expensive. We won't quite be going that far, but even still, one lab will make this whole run fairly slow. So of course, we walk a bit a ways from where we landed and set up a second, much larger lab. With the first of the three matrices we'll need being produced, it's time to start working towards the next one. Energy matrices, the red cube, will open up everything we need for the achievement aside from the last two upgrades. We'll need hydrogen and graphite to make them, so let's work on getting those set up. Graphite is produced by running coal through a smelter, so we get a miner started on a coal vein. The last upgrade that we'll want to grab before we head off into space is Drive Engine 3, which will dramatically cut our flight time down. So while we work on the graphite production, we start researching the first level. Or we would if it didn't require an item I didn't recognize. I recorded this not long after the Rise of the Dark Fog update that reworked a few of the recipes. We actually need the ability to produce engines for the research, so we make a quick detour, and a few minutes later we get the tech we need. Not long after that, we have our graphite production up and running. The next step for us is oil production. We start by unlocking the plasma refining technology. An energy matrix lab needs both coal and oil within close proximity, so we spend a bit of time scouring the world map for those. Luckily for us, there's a location not too far from where we started that'll make for a good lab. We also pick up thermal power, which isn't necessary, but it does help deal with the gas that's left over when we produce hydrogen. After clearing the site for the lab, I realized that we need steel for the oil extractor, which I actually don't have the tech to make. The labs we set up previously will be more than enough to handle the research, but we finally crossed Drive Engine 1 off the list. Just a bit later, we knock out steel smelting as well, and set up a small factory to make conveyors so we don't have to waste time doing that. Continuing on, we start setting up a steel factory to cover what we'll need for our oil refineries. With the extra time, we also pick up the basic chemical engineering tech that we'll need for the third matrix, though we won't need it just yet. A few minutes later, we have the start of our oil refinery and the energy matrix tech. Unlike the basic labs, the refineries are very resource intensive. While we get the materials we need, we grab an inventory upgrade, as well as the semiconductor and graphene techs. In a normal playthrough, they're both incredibly important, but they won't help us out much here. I also picked up processors, which really won't be used for anything in this achievement. Old habits die hard, I guess. After we craft all the materials we need, we spend some time setting up the oil refinery. With the hydrogen from the refinery and the graphite from the nearby coal vein, we get a lab set up to produce the coveted red cubes. Labs need each required color of matrix to research a tech, so we do still need to figure out how to feed them into our old labs. With our second energy lab up and running, we now have more red cubes than I know what to do with, so we research the second level of universe exploration. This isn't strictly necessary, but we'll need to leave the planet to find enough titanium for our purposes, and this will let us know where to go. We also pick up polymer chemical engineering so we can make organic crystals, and titanium smelting so we can smelt titanium, as you might imagine. We'll also need the ability to make diamonds, so we pick that up as well. The last major milestone for us is the structure matrix. This yellow cube is needed for the upgrade that will max out our speed pre-warp so the trip doesn't take forever. You need a diamond and a titanium crystal to make them. One of those we have, so we research the other while we start setting up a factory to produce some plastic. We get that up and running, but the main purpose for plastic, for us at least, is an ingredient in organic crystals. While we work on making those, we grab the tech for structure matrices. We also research hydrogen fuel cells, which are honestly probably overkill in terms of what we're trying to do. Our organic crystal factory comes online shortly after. Normally, this is one of the spots that my production hits a snag, but for some reason it's working great. I blame the experience gained with several dozen hours in Satisfactory helping me set things up a little better. We use a nearby coal vein to set up a small line for diamonds, and then start setting up the lab that we'll need for the structure matrices right next to it. Normally I'd try to set it up in a more open area that could support a spaceport, but we're not going to be playing that far into the game. While we're making our preparations for the lab, we also get Drive Engine 2. We officially have all but 2 of the researches that we're going to need for this achievement. In the course of clearing land throughout the run, we've been getting trace amounts of titanium ore, which we use to make our first structure matrix. We'll need to get a lot more though, so we take a look at the star map and find that the neighboring planet has titanium in spades. It also has naturally occurring fire ice, which would be great if this were going to be a longer run. With our sights set, we make our first space flight. There's something about the vast emptiness of space I've always found unnerving, especially when it comes to planets flying by. It's not as bad in this game as it is in something like Prey 2017, but it does capture the feeling quite nicely. Our flight is short and uneventful, however, and we land on the new planet ready to steal every bit of titanium that isn't nailed down. After locating the nearest titanium vein, we set up a factory that exists just to produce as much titanium as possible. We need 3 of them for every structure matrix, and we need about 1,400 matrices, so we're going to be ferrying a lot of titanium between planets. Once we fill our inventory, we fly back to our home planet so we can get back to work. Facilities on different planets run while you're away, so if we need to come back later, there will be plenty of titanium waiting for us. Just a side note, I suspect this fact is the reason why the devs have no plan to add multiplayer to the game. I can't imagine having multiple players building factories across dozens of planets would be easy for any game to handle. Now that we have easy access to titanium, we can start crafting hydrogen fuel cells. They're a pretty decent fuel for the early and mid-game, and something that I usually like having access to. With the way that spaceflight works in this game, A fairly realistic system where you don't need to keep burning fuel once you hit your max speed. We actually don't need them. Like I said earlier, old habits die hard. Crafting the titanium crystals we need for the matrices is taking longer than I wanted, though, so we double the number of assemblers we have working on them. While our yellow cube stocks go higher, we set up the feed for our labs. Normally, I'd use either long conveyor lines to move things around, or drones if I'm feeling particularly ambitious. But given that we're almost done here, I'm just going to drop a couple boxes that we can dump them in and have them feed in automatically. And here's where we enter the home stretch. After moving over enough yellow cubes, we research the third mech core upgrade. This gives us a huge battery to work with, and is required for the third drive engine upgrade. Once we get those last 1,000 matrices that we need, we research the final upgrade and set off into the stars. We angle ourselves at the nearest star system, which is a cool 2.4 light years away. By my math, this should take a bit over 7 million years at our top speed, but since YouTube won't let me upload a video that long, it's a good thing the game's telling us it'll take about 48 minutes. So while we're flying, I want to take a moment to finalize my thoughts on Dyson Sphere program. As one of my go-to games when I need to unwind, obviously I'm a big fan, and while Satisfactory has quietly crept up to my favorite game in the genre, this is the one I'd recommend first to someone who wants to give them a try. Between the ability to turn on infinite resource nodes and turn off the enemies, the game is very beginner-friendly, and there are a lot of customization options. Besides, there's no feeling like getting your first spaceport set up and seeing the tiny space trucks shipping things through the void. But what are your thoughts? Do you enjoy the factory sim genre? Is there a better game to start with than this one? Many good games I might have missed besides the big four? Let me know down in the comments, I'm always looking for new ones to check out. After flying in a straight line for almost an hour, we reach the new star system. However, I found out that the marker goes straight to the star itself, and I don't feel like getting a sunburn today, so we instead angle towards the first planet that we see. Moments after touching down, we get before our time, crossing off what I would consider the strangest achievement in this game. Wait, what's that? What about Let There Be Light, the achievement that requires you to do some very specific things when you're very nearly done with a playthrough? Maybe one day.